We are going to move seamlessly now, if that's okay, into our very final session of the conference, which is a discussion session which we have put together with the aim of trying to reflect on the 3 days of our conference. And I wanted to start by thanking all of our speakers who've participated on day 1, 2 and 3, because it is the really brilliant contributions that you have made which will lay the groundwork for the discussions that we are able to have in this final session. You have seen her popping up, but it is my moment to formally introduce my colleague, Myriam Boussahba-Bravard, who is a Professor of British History at the University Lav, and who has co-organised this conference with Alan and myself. Myriam and I will be chairing this final session. As a reminder to everybody, we are recording this session, but this is only for the purposes of conference organisers reviewing the discussions. So we will be recording this session, but the session will not end up being put online. So we hope that will kind of sort of encourage people to speak openly in this space this afternoon. Myriam, can I hand over to you to perhaps say just a little bit more about our aims for the session?
Okay, so what we expect to do with you is that from the initial 2 questions that we sent to you, I think it was yesterday, that we could sort of fairly informally actually jump in and say what every one of us expected from the conference. Perhaps say and this is going to be perhaps more interesting for the whole group of us, what we didn't expect but thought was quite interesting into thinking a bit more or exchanging between each other. And the second question is about what we do after this conference. What could we do together? What would you be interested in doing? So this is basically the 2 questions we would like to address with you for this final moment for the conference.
Myriam, perhaps if I might start by sharing a few of my own hopes, perhaps more than expectations, for the conference, and maybe that will give people a little bit of a chance to have a think about their own views. When Myriam and I first approached Alan with the idea for this conference back in 2019, I think, we were both at the time researching in collections in Churchill College archives, in which diaries, notebooks were very prominent parts of those collections. And I think I speak for both Myriam and I that at the time we were really learning about those diaries and those collections in conversation with the archive team. And so from the very beginning of thinking about this conference, we really wanted to bring together perspectives of historians and archivists on these questions. So one of certainly my initial hopes was that that the conference was going to be a space for interdisciplinary discussion between us. Just three other brief hopes, I think, that I initially had that I'd be willing to share. I certainly hoped that the conference would be a chance to think expansively about the diary genre. And I'm building on Claire's talk. I think we've really heard so many important contributions to thinking about that idea. And I hoped also that in doing that this would be a chance for us to reflect on the methodological challenges, either of thinking expansively about the diary genre. under viewing different types of life writings under this umbrella of the diary, you know, there might be methodological problems in doing that. But also, I hoped we would reflect on the sort of methodological challenges that might arise from narrowing our perspective, from distinguishing different forms of writing and record keeping that might actually have much more real connections in people, in the sort of everyday world of their authors. And I think this has come out in really many of the papers where we've been discussing the kind of slippage between the diary and many other forms of writing and recording. And lastly, I suppose I'd really hoped the conference would open up questions about the self, thinking about the self, and particularly for me, thinking about the self in relation to the active role that the creation and keeping of diaries played in people's lives. So how the diary might be a way of documenting the self in action was something that I was really interested in our initial thinking about the conference. And again, I think we've heard many case studies that sort of really speak to that idea of the self in action, as well as the introspective self. So those would be a few thoughts from me. Would it be fair to perhaps ask Alan if he had any thoughts?
Okay, yeah, very happy to come in next, although obviously agree with everything that's been said so far. I mean, I think for myself, I didn't really come into this process and into the conference with too many expectations. I wanted to find out what other people were doing with diaries, how they were approaching making them available, the issues that they were encountering, the ways in which they were using them in their research. And I think, you know, picking up on what you've said and what Claire said in the keynote, one of the things that all 3 days of the conference have highlighted for me is that there is an enormous range and diversity and breadth in this subject. I mean, just look at the examples that we've had this afternoon, where we've moved from chalet books to cinema diaries to zines and comics. And it seems to me that with every session of this conference, including this afternoon's, we've sort of broadened and widened our framework and our definition of what constitutes a diary. And it's moved a long way from something that would be simply narrative, textual and chronological, to now incorporate scrapbooks, photograph albums, zines. And I think, you know, it's also been interesting in that the focus has been as much on the format and the materiality of the diaries as the content. Looking at it from sort of a perspective as a custodian of many of these diaries, a repository that holds many of these diaries, I think it's also highlighted for me the role that we and other repositories play in influencing the interpretation and the research through our actions in selecting, appraising diaries, but then cataloguing them, and the depth to which we catalogue them, and the editing and the digitization. And I think you know, we need to be more aware of perhaps what we are doing and not doing. And I think, you know, there'll be lots of interesting discussions within the Archive Centre team, sort of following on and from these sessions. In terms of the future, because you asked about that, I mean, obviously the immediate next step, which would probably remind everyone of, is that we're going to take the presentations, not the Q&A, but the presentations from all 3 days of the conference, and we're going to make them available, publicly available, on the Churchill Archives Centre website, where you've given permission for us to do so, so that we will have that as a sort of founding resource that we can go back to. But I hope that that this is very much just the beginning of this network, and that it does continue to develop. And I know we're going to explore ways in which that might happen. And I think we as an archive centre and I as an individual are certainly open to exploring further collaborations, perhaps so that we can build that mega Godzilla that was referred to earlier.
Okay, so my turn now for expectations and hopes. So of course I agree with Eve and Alan, and I'm not going to repeat what they said, except that we've been very pleased as organizers. We've been very pleased that our concern for focusing on making diaries has been respected by all participants. So that was a great bonus for us, because even though, of course, diary keepers are interesting, but we wanted really to start with a focus on the diaries, because this is what we wanted to do, really. And the hope was, of course, that we would find obviously diversity, but also perhaps commonalities between all these diaries. Now we've started to think, and most of the talks have actually been going around this as well, how we name these artifacts, which is basically the question of the nature of diaries. And again, nature is not a word which is sufficient to find out about what we really mean. In fact, diaries mean so many things that we have to sort of discipline our minds in the way we want to think about them, without, as Eve said, narrowing our scope. Now, I think this conference has been a moment to look into the way diary keepers relate to their diaries. And this is something which was of interest beyond the personality of each diary keeper. So whether diaries are tools or friends, whether there are instances of creativity or therapy, or all of it, we have a sort of self-plan architecture of the selves that could be either personal, professional, familial, intimate, or all of them. So by examining diaries for themselves, I believe we could grasp more of their working functions and specificities beyond diary keepers. And in a way, I think this conference has been a great success to start looking at that. But of course, there's obviously a need for more exchanges of different kinds, perhaps not always conferences. I could imagine a series of workshops to further our study of diary making. Now, we have plans for publication that I will mention at the end of our discussion, but I think now the floor is yours to all speakers from days 1, 2, and 3. If you want to contribute to this moment, of course, you're welcome.
Hi, I'm going to jump in after those really interesting remarks from everyone. I just want to say, as a scholar who's sort of working with scrapbooks, I found the conversations about the materiality of diary keeping really useful, as already mentioned, and exploring the different roles that material objects play in kind of constructing the self. And I guess whether you're looking at Zines or notebooks or scrapbooks or diaries, that the sort of methodologies that come with each of those formats, I think, are really useful, and I think encourages you to sort of look at those other formats more critically and draw on some of those methodologies. I guess one of the things I found really helpful as well is the honesty that I think we've had in discussing working with diaries, and in that sometimes we find things that we're really excited about and it meets our expectations, but actually sometimes the diaries don't tell us necessarily what we wanted to find. And I think, as I found that very interesting to kind of look at how we methodologically deal with that, and also respect that as well from the diarist, and how that in itself is a form of kind of self-archiving, a strategy that we do need to get our heads around. So I guess I found that that openness and transparency really helpful for how we work with diaries, which I think can also probably transfer into how we think about other sort of primary sources as well. And I would just highlight as well how productive the conversations have been between archivists and academics, and that kind of crossover. I think that's been really useful, and I hope that really continues in whatever form kind of our network takes in the future. But yeah, thank you very much. I've got a great deal from the conference, so thanks.
Okay, we have a hand raised from Victoria Oxbury. Victoria, if you want to come in.
Hi. Yeah, I think for me it's just been a fantastic experience more than anything. As those of you I certainly spoke to at the thing, because I work for a local authority record office, so just having the opportunity to be around, you know, obviously ours is quite a practical day-to-day kind of thing. We don't get to do a whole lot of things like research and things like that. So it was just really good to be amongst sort of, you know, like an educational academic kind of thing. And, you know, it's all really sort of got me fired up on the one hand to want to do something more, but on the other hand, don't really know what or where I can take anything sort of personally at the moment. So I guess for me, it's kind of just to say that, you know, depending on where this does go next, I really would love to be involved in it in whatever way I can. I'm not sure I've got any sort of instigating ideas necessarily, but it's just been really great just to be a part of like this community and things. So
thank you. That's great. Have we got others who want to come in? I can see Rachel Murphy there. Rachel, you sent an email yesterday. Do you want to speak to that?
Hello, I can. I don't know if you can hear me very well.
We can
sorry,
hear you.
I'm in an airport at the moment, so it might be a bit muffled, so apologies for that. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for a great 3 days. I was only unfortunately able to dip in and out of it, but the presentations that I heard were really interesting. I enjoyed the wide variety of presentations and approaches. And as everyone else has said, I think, you know, the combination of archivists and historians working together, it has been interesting to sort of hear that aspect. The one thing that I was particularly interested in was a question that I had in the session, I think it was a session with Cherish as well, where someone was asked us a question about digital diaries and accessibility, longevity, and so on. And I'd certainly be really keen to see, you know, to maybe explore that further, seeing how archivists and historians can work together. You know, I talked about a resource that we built, but I know that you have them there. Most universities do have that, and other organisations, and it's how can we actually maybe have something that crosses that, or, you know, unites all of these different resources that are available. So if anyone's interested in talking about that further, I'd certainly be really interested in that myself. And then also I think the sort of you know, it was just great to be able to meet people that are doing the same kind of research, and to have that sort of ability to network with people and get to know people. So that's just a very brief summary from me, but thank you very much.
I thank you, Rachel. I see Simon has raised his hand. Simon.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. I guess I'd like to add in some thoughts about what people do to teach with diaries in university settings, library settings, archive settings, whether it's through showcasing them, how exactly scholars and others work with diaries with students, what you do about the challenge of setting an extract from a diary versus expecting students to read a whole diary, what types of assumptions they're likely to make. So I guess sort of thinking about what we do with these material artifacts in terms of sharing that knowledge with people that might be new to using diaries as historical sources, as an element of what might kind of follow next from this really fantastic discussion that has been hosted today and on the previous 2 days.
Thank you. Anybody would? Kate, all right, Kate, I can see your hand, so the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see everybody again, and sorry I was late. It's very early in the morning in Portland, but this has just been such a sort of soul-feeding experienced the conference. The 2 days in Cambridge were wonderful. And I came in quite specifically wanting to get ideas and references and frameworks for the introduction to the subsequent volumes of the Molina Diaries that I'm editing, partially because when I was trying to write the introduction to the first, I would find little pockets of information about diary keeping, but not something comprehensive. And so I feel like the wide variety of diaries that we've encountered at this conference, and scholars working on really different periods and kinds of diaries, and as Cherish mentioned, has been really fulfilling and makes me excited about a publication or a website or something, because it does feel like there's a lack of a kind of large scale cohesive place to be thinking through diary keeping as a genre. And it's been really great to in Cambridge specifically, to be in a room with other stewards of diaries, of different people's diaries, and thinking through the kind of messy things of dealing with families and estates and repositories and archives. And so I feel like the community that you've provided here has been really, really valuable. And some of the threads I keep thinking that I've been thinking about since I left the conference are about navigating the public and the private, and those kind of both related and in tension aspects of diary keeping. What is the role of the steward of the diaries? I keep thinking about Catherine's paper about the Hudson Bay Company diaries and what it means. You know, I think I took it for granted that diaries are something that someone wants to keep, right? And so I was really interested in the sessions in Cambridge with being exposed to, and mass observation is another example of different kinds of imperatives behind diary keeping. And that's been very exciting. I feel like I've learned a lot. And I would hope that, you know, whether we have a publication of scholarly work or even a publication of images from the different primary sources we've all been working with. I would love to come back to Cambridge and have a future conference. So thank you so much.
Okay, does somebody else want to jump in? I can't see any hands raised. Can you see any, Eva?
I'm looking. Yes, somebody's hand is raised. Is that Alma?
So we have a hand raised from Alma, but Alma, I think, is a part. Are you able? I'm not sure. I think Alma is an attendee rather than a panelist. So I think, Alma, if we can just ask you, can you submit your comment through the Zoom Q&A? I'm sorry, we can't. I don't think we can hear you. I don't think there's a way that we can go live. Yeah. So Alma's just replied to say she's going to submit through the Zoom Q&A. And we've also had a comment in the chat from David Brown. So I don't know whether he wants to come in at this stage. David, did you want to say anything? No. Okay. No.
Okay. Have you got any news from Alma?
We're just waiting for her to submit. So if any others would like to come in.
Okay, so Alma's written in the chat that she's currently working on, apologies Alma for my lack of pronunciation here, Wajidi Muawad's diaries, and wanted to know where I can find the records of the conferences. I'm wondering here, Alma, if you mean where you can find the recordings of previous papers given at the conference. I hope that might be your question. Alan, would you be able to let Alma know where to find those, where they're hosted on the website?
Yes, I will. I mean, what we will do is we'll be able to send out exact information to all participants once the material goes live on the website. But what I can say at the moment is that all of the presentations from all days 1, 2, and 3 will be going up on the Churchill Archive Centre website, which is part of the Churchill College website. So if you type Churchill Archive Centre and events, or Churchill Archive Centre and diaries into your web browser in a week or so's time, you should be able to find everything, but we will also be sending out a link to those who attended.
Thank you, Alan. And Alma, you might have seen Kate's just put in the chat to encourage you to make contact and connect with her, because she's also working on a theatre director, actor and playwright's diaries. So that might be an individual connection that you might want to follow up. Thank you for that, Kate.
Okay, so are there people who want to chop in? This is okay. I can't see any hands raised. So just checking with Eve that you can't see any hands raised before we sort of no. All right.
One question that Simon's just put in the chat, a really important question. Did you discuss ethics in the first 2 days? And I think we did in places. Simon, ethics kind of kept sort of coming to the fore and back again. And I certainly remember in the first panel on making an archive, we sort of picked up on those questions both from an archivist perspective and from some of those interesting questions that sort of Cherish alluded to earlier about, you know, researchers respecting what is written in a diary, and how we use those. I'm personally very interested in this as a wider question. I'm not sure, Simon, if you were thinking of anything more specifically.
Yes, could I come in on this just briefly? Oh, great, thank you. So those of us who work within the academic system will know about research ethics, clearance policies, and so on. And I clearly remember we had this talk from someone in the classics department at my university, and he said something I really fundamentally disagreed with. He said, "You can do what you like with the dead. You can do what you like with the dead." And it got me thinking, well, no, I don't really think that you can, or nor should you. And so it raises interesting questions in multiple ways about documents that were probably intended for private consumption, as of course has been discussed at the conference, but also more particular ethics, such as ethics to do with cherry picking certain days or moments from a diary and ignoring perhaps dull moments, the kind of methodological ethics, if you will, of doing that. So it's not only about making something public that might have been intended for private or familial consumption, but how to approach the sometimes dullness of diaries, and how we should, going back to my earlier point on teaching, how we should encourage our students and perhaps members of the public too, not merely to zero in on high moments of drama, but to consider things perhaps more in the round. And that's where a kind of chronological spread of a diary can be so useful.
Yeah. Okay, yes, Claire. Want to jump in?
Yeah, just on that point on ethics, I think there's also I think it's a really interesting point. I think there's an analytical dimension to it around the extent, or certainly I often feel that quite intensely, around the extent to which the diarist is themselves a co-analyst in our analytical work, because they are often very well placed, and often, certainly in mass observation diaries, often actively offering their own analysis of their own life. And so that kind of way in how we as historians sort of deal with that, and where the balance should sit, because we also often have this sense of ourselves as our job is to analyze and to offer interpretation. So I think that can be quite an ethical, there's a lot of discussion for those of us trained in oral history around this. What do you do when your oral history interviewee actually disagrees with your interpretation of their life? And I think it's something we can think productively with in relation to diaries as well. I think the other thing I wanted to say in relation to what Simon just said was also that sense of which diaries, not just cherry picking particular parts of diaries, but also which diaries are of interest. And I'm thinking there about Alison Twell's work on the ordinary diary, the diary that only has the very short entry, and that obviously has been discussed by people as well. But the less, I suppose, the diary that doesn't have as much interiority, I think there are really interesting questions around that, which have already been raised this afternoon as well. Thank you.
Now, actually, we addressed, as Eve said, we addressed this question of ethics directly and indirectly on days 1 and 2. We sort of discussed family as well. The fact that when the diary keeper dies, it's usually the family who are the first to engage with the diary, and they go on a job which is weeding out very often. So I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just saying this is just a statement, right? And so once the family's gone through it and weeded it out, it does help, I think, us in a way, although we may deplore some lost, invaluable type of information, but it enables us to think that the people who knew the person, whether it's correct or not, perhaps, they hated that person, but people who knew that person perhaps could be the most appreciative of what should be left, what shouldn't be left in the diary. So that's a way for us perhaps to feel more tranquility about the way we use diaries, although I'm not saying this is a perfect way, but it is just a criterion we can use. I personally work on diaries which have been weeded out by the man himself, the diary keeper, and then by his sons repeatedly, and you've got the dates every time things have been weeded out. So you feel that what's left is, after all, perhaps something you can use with respect, of course, but something you can use more or less respecting what the diary keeper meant. But I don't think there's any way that we can be completely 100% certain of that. But well, that was one of the points we discussed. I can't remember which day, but precedingly. Okay, right, Lee?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to say, firstly, just like a broad kind of thank you for organising and everyone for contributing. I'm not a historian per se. I'm fairly, I think with zine culture, a kind of scavenger of disciplines, and kind of with the collaborative doctoral award in kind of an unusual position of being supervised both by scholars at Kent and also within the collections development team at Wellcome. So very conscious that a lot of my work is around potentially the eventual uses of the zine collection at Wellcome, which is why I think I found so many of the kind of discussions productive, and especially this question of ethics, which I think within zines, they're kind of these strange diary-like documents, but they are written with a belief in their kind of ephemeral state. People aren't expecting them to be preserved and archived, and certainly the zines that I work with that are around health and medicine are often made resisting, actively resisting interpretation and analysis. They don't want to be read, often in academic context, which makes the efforts of working them now as a kind of, people often describe zines and archives as being kind of like having a half-life, because they were alive documents in their time, and now they're in the archive. They're not dead. They have this strange half-life. But yeah, zines now where the creators are alive and the community is still actively aware of how they're being used, but also zines made 50 years ago where there's no sense of tracing a creator. So yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I think it's like I think it's there's not a strong grounding in kind of zine studies in terms of like how these will be written about, 50 years from now, how archives of zines are going to be used. So I found it really interesting hearing about different ways that diaries and diary-like objects are being used. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, can't see, but sometimes I don't see, so just help me check. Can't see. Okay, right. Shall I go on then, Eve? Yeah, okay. Right, so we have some plans for publication. So we intend to publish an edited book, a scholarly book, and a special issue in a journal. So Eve and I need to work the calendar. So we're going to contact you again very soon, although we don't know the date, perhaps let's say before the summer, with a calendar and some prospective publishers. Now we are going first to find out whether you're interested in such a publication, whether the book or the journal, and then whether you will have the time to do it, and so on and so forth, and also whether you have ideas about prospective publishers we should target first. So now hopefully, we hope, of course, that most of you, if not all of you, will be interested in publishing with us, but this is of course up to you. So we'll send this email before the summer and try to find out what you wish to do and what we'll try to do. So today we think of two types of publication: an edited book and a special issue in a journal, in a scholarly journal. Okay, so perhaps now is the time for thanks. I do not know if I should thank Zoom and the like for their wonderful technology that has enabled us to work differently, certainly, from, let's say, last 10 years. So it has enabled us to have this 3-day conference, despite COVID, despite call for strike action, despite everything. So we finally managed to have this conference organized, and so we're quite happy about that. So I would like to thank all the people who made this conference possible: Amanda, Alan and Eve. A big thank you as well for the AV team here, which has made our job much easier. Churchill College, obviously, for its wonderful facilities and people. The Churchill Archive Centers as well, and my greatest thanks for all the speakers who've made this conference successful in person or remotely, for their interest, their contribution, and hopefully their wish to publish with us and be part of a diary network. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you all very much, and that concludes the conference, I think. So,
yes.
We hope we'll see you all again as this network continues to develop. Thank you.